They crashed 2 trains on purpose. We are not talking about a tragic accident, a derailment, or a safety test. In 1896, the railroad took 2 35-ton steam locomotives, backed them up 4 miles apart, tied the throttles wide open, and let them rip. It was a 90 miles per hour stunt that became a bomb. Over 40,000 Americans gathered in the Texas dirt just to watch this ultimate display of raw, unregulated industrial violence. It was a carnival of steel. The engineers jumped off, and the crowd cheered as the massive iron titans screamed toward each other. The men who planned this spectacle did not calculate the physics of compression. They thought the trains would just crumple like tin cans. They had no idea they had just built the largest fragmentation grenade in American history. When millions of pounds of kinetic energy met 200 pounds of steam pressure, the world stopped. What happens when the ultimate American publicity stunt turns into an apocalyptic nightmare? William Crush stood in the boardroom with a proposition that sounded like a fever dream. The year was 1896, and the Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railroad, known as the Katy, was bleeding riders. The panic of the early 1890s had left the rails quiet. Americans were restless, desperate for spectacle, and the Katy's passenger cars rolled emptier every month. Crush, a showman in a conductor's suit, saw opportunity in disaster. Why not give the public a show so audacious, so thunderous, that it would echo from the Gulf to Chicago? He didn't just want to sell tickets, he wanted to make the Katy the only name anyone could shout about. His pitch was simple: build a city from nothing, lay a special 4-mile track in the Texas wilderness, and crash 2 full-size steam locomotives at maximum throttle, head-on, in front of tens of thousands. Not a demonstration for engineers, not a test for safety. This would be pure, unfiltered industrial theater, a gladiator match of iron and fire. The boardroom crackled with the kind of Gilded Age confidence that believed anything could be bought, built, or broken for the right price. The executives didn't see a risk, they saw a marketing bonanza. Every ticket sold meant more eyes on the Katy, more feet on the rails, more headlines screaming about the might of American steel. Crush promised a controlled collision. He assured them the spectacle would be safe. The locomotives, he said, would crumple like tin toys. The crowd would gasp, the photographers would snap, and the Katy would bask in the glow of progress. No one in that room spoke of boilers, pressure, or the physics of steel under strain. The only numbers that mattered were ticket sales and column inches. The Gilded Age was a time when fortunes rose and fell on the back of a single, outrageous idea. If the world wanted a show, the Katy would give them a cataclysm. Within weeks, the company greenlit the plan. Contracts flew out to carpenters, tent makers, track layers, and food vendors. The Katy would build an instant city, sell special excursion tickets, and advertise the crash as the event of the century. William Crush, now the ringmaster of the world's most dangerous circus, had his marching orders: deliver a spectacle so grand that nobody would ever forget the name on the side of the engine. The Texas prairie vanished beneath a tide of lumber, canvas, and rails. In just a few weeks, the Katy's contractors conjured a city from raw dirt, a pop-up metropolis called Crush, Texas, with nothing but sky above and commerce below. 4 miles of brand new track gleamed in the sun, laid straight as a rifle shot, with no purpose but destruction. The rails ran parallel across open ground, flanked by viewing banks graded for the best possible sightlines. This was no afterthought. Engineers calculated the grade, hammered every spike, and ballasted the ties as if they were building the main line to St. Louis. But here, the end of the line was a collision. Crush was designed for spectacle, not survival. The railroad ordered enough tents to rival a military encampment. A grandstand rose at the center, flanked by a press platform, food stalls, and a jail cell for drunks. Water wells were sunk, telegraph lines strung, and a wooden fence marked the supposed boundary of safety. Vendors hawked lemonade, barbecue, and commemorative badges. By September 15, 1896, the city of Crush could swallow 40,000 people. more than lived in Waco or Austin at the time. Trains rolled in from every direction, each one packed with ticket holders hungry for a show. At the heart of this iron carnival stood the gladiators, two steam locomotives hand-picked for their size and spectacle. Engine number 999, painted a deep, glossy green with polished brass trim, faced off against number 1001, decked in blazing red with silver highlights. Each weighed over 30 tons, their fireboxes stoked and boilers filled to the brim with superheated water. The numbers shone like war paint. Their steel wheels were oiled, their cowcatchers sharpened, and their tenders loaded with coal to ensure a full head of steam. These were not museum pieces or battered yard engines, these were working machines, primed for one last violent sprint. The crowd pressed against the ropes, sizing up the combatants. Children perched on shoulders, men waved their hats, and photographers checked their tripods. The air vibrated with the hiss of safety valves and the distant clatter of hammer on steel. Every detail was engineered for maximum awe: the length of the track, the color of the engines, the promise that when iron met iron, something unforgettable would happen. This was the Gilded Age's answer to the Roman Colosseum, a cathedral of progress, built for a single, thundering moment. Steam hissed from the safety valves as the two engineers climbed into their cabs, faces set, hands steady. Each man reached for the throttle, an iron lever that controlled the flow of live steam straight from the boiler to the pistons. The procedure was simple but absolute. Open the throttle wide, tie it down so it couldn't slip, and let the beast run. There was no governor, no automatic shutoff, just raw mechanical force. With a practiced motion, they jammed the throttles forward and lashed them in place with wire and cord. The engines shuddered as full steam surged into the cylinders. Firemen shoveled coal into the grates, stoking the flames hotter, driving the pressure higher, every pound per square inch arming the boiler like a bomb. The crowd pressed closer, hundreds slipping under the rope lines, drawn by the promise of a better view. Children darted between legs. Photographers crouched in the dust, glass plates ready to capture the instant of destruction. The air was thick with anticipation and the sharp tang of coal smoke. On the signal, the engineers released the brakes. The wheels bit into the rails, steel shrieking against steel. Each locomotive lurched forward, pistons hammering, driving rods flashing in the sunlight. There was no turning back. With the throttles locked open, the engines would accelerate unchecked, building momentum with every second. The men rode for a few heartbeats, 4 turns of the driving wheels, then jumped clear, tumbling to the ground as their machines thundered toward destiny. Behind them, the boilers strained at nearly 180 pounds per square inch, water inside boiling at 380 degrees, the iron shells holding back a mountain of pressure. Every foot the engines traveled packed more energy into the system, winding the spring tighter. The crowd, now dangerously close, barely breathed. The fuse was lit. 2 locomotives, each weighing more than 30 tons, thundered down the rails with throttles lashed wide open. Their pistons hammered, wheels blurred, and every second brought them closer to a closing speed just shy of 90 miles per hour. To the crowd, it looked like pure speed. To a physicist, it was a kinetic energy box arming itself for detonation. At 90 miles per hour, these engines were not just moving fast, they were storing up a punch that no human could stand in front of. Kinetic energy isn't just about weight, it's about velocity squared. Double the speed and the energy quadruples. Each locomotive, at full tilt, carried enough kinetic energy to hurl a city bus through a brick wall. Together, they packed a combined energy punch of roughly 50 million joules, the kind of number that makes steel bend, rivets shear, and iron leap off the rails. It's easy to picture a train as a rolling fortress, but in this moment, each was more like a battering ram with a live bomb at its heart. The boilers, thick-walled, riveted, and bristling with tension, held back thousands of gallons of water, all superheated and ready to flash into steam. Every foot the engines traveled, every heartbeat, wound the spring tighter. The crowd pressed closer, oblivious to the math, but the laws of motion and mass were not on anyone's side. The countdown was burning fast. The real countdown was measured in joules, not seconds. Impact arrives like a gunshot. 60 tons of iron and steel slammed together at a closing speed just shy of 90 miles per hour, no brakes, no mercy, just the raw arithmetic of mass and velocity. The crowd's roar is drowned in a sound so sharp it feels like a punch. The shriek of rivets shearing, the groan of steel plate folding. The instant when two pressure vessels, each swollen with boiling water at 180 pounds per square inch, meet head-on. The outer shells, built of half-inch steel and stitched together with hundreds of red-hot rivets, are no match for the collision. Riveted seams tear like paper. The barrels of both boilers buckle, their cylindrical bodies no longer able to contain the monstrous force inside. This is not a gentle crumple, this is rupture. The moment the shells split, superheated water, 1,500 gallons per engine, simmering at nearly 380 degrees, meets the outside world. Pressure, held in check for hours by nothing but steel and faith, is gone in a blink. There is no time for the crowd to react. Metal flies before sound can catch up. Heavy iron fragments, drive rods, bolts, lengths of boilerplate, launch outward at speeds that turn them into shrapnel. The air is filled with the scream of escaping steam and the unmistakable howl of steel failing catastrophically. For a split second, the two engines are no longer machines. They are open wounds, bleeding heat and energy into the open air. The collision has done its work. The pressure vessels have lost their war with physics. Inside the ruptured boilers, physics took over with the indifference of a guillotine. At 180 pounds per square inch, water does not just simmer, it boils at nearly 380 degrees. The moment the steel shell split, that superheated liquid met the open air. Pressure was gone in a blink. And when water under that kind of pressure is suddenly released, it does not just turn to steam, it flashes, expanding to 1,600 times its original volume in a fraction of a second. That is a BLEVE, a boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion. The entire contents of each boiler, thousands of pounds of water, tried to become steam at once. The expansion was so violent, it tore the iron carcasses apart from the inside out. Plates of steel, some as thick as your wrist, were ripped loose and hurled through the air like shrapnel from a howitzer. A drive chain, weighing hundreds of pounds, wrapped itself around a distant tree trunk as if it were nothing more than a length of twine. A single iron bolt, torn free from the boiler head, traveled with such force it struck a man in the crowd and killed him instantly. His skull was opened by a fragment moving faster than any bullet. Fragments rained down across the prairie. Some pieces landed over 1,000 feet from the point of impact. The crowd, stunned, watched as the air filled with scalding vapor and burning metal. This was not the tidy spectacle the railroad promised. This was a pressure bomb detonated in public. The laws of thermodynamics did not care about ticket sales or grandstands. When the shell failed, the energy inside did exactly what physics demanded. It turned iron into shrapnel and a crowd into a target. Silence hung for a split second after the blast, broken only by the hiss of escaping steam and the distant wail of the wounded. The crowd, 40,000 strong, had come for a spectacle. What they got was a battlefield. Shrapnel didn't care about tickets or safe zones. A bolt as thick as a man's thumb punched through Ava King's skull, dropping her where she stood. A boy who'd climbed a tree for a better view never made it down, struck dead by a flying wheel, his body hurled to the ground. 2 lives ended instantly, claimed by fragments moving faster than any bullet. 6 more lay bleeding and broken, some with shattered limbs, others burned raw by scalding vapor. Dozens staggered away clutching wounds. Dazed by the violence that had erupted from a machine everyone thought they understood. But the prairie didn't stay still for long. Even as smoke drifted and the dead were carried aside, the crowd surged forward, driven by a fever that had nothing to do with grief. Men, women, and children scrambled over the wreckage, snatching up anything that wasn't bolted down. A hunk of boilerplate, still sizzling hot, became a trophy. Chunks of twisted rod and scorched brass vanished into pockets. Some burned their hands so badly they needed bandages, but didn't let go of their prizes. The field became a scramble for souvenirs, proof that you'd stood close to the edge when American steel met its match. Doctors rushed from tent to tent, patching wounds and setting bones. But the real story was written in the faces of the living. Shock, awe, and something like shame flickered in the eyes that had come for a show and found themselves part of a disaster. The promise of safe spectacle had been shattered in an instant. Now, the only thing left was the cost, measured in blood, broken bodies, and the charred iron scattered across the Texas dirt. Katy Railroad's boardroom never lost sleep over the math of boiler pressure or the velocity of flying iron. Their calculus ran on a different set of numbers: ticket sales, column inches, and the cost of a quiet settlement. When the smoke cleared and the bodies were counted, the company's response was brisk, businesslike, and deeply American. Families of the dead received payouts, exact figures lost to time, but likely in the low thousands, a sum that could buy a small house or a few years of silence. The injured were handed lifetime passes on the Katy, a gesture that cost the company little but looked generous in the papers. Ride for free, forever, on the very rails that almost killed you. No executive resigned. William Crush, the public face of disaster, was fired before the ink dried on the morning headlines, then quietly rehired a day later, his notoriety now part of the Katy's legend. The company issued statements of sympathy and moved on. There was no lawsuit of record, no grand inquest, just a flurry of telegrams and a few checks cut from petty cash. The real payout came in the form of publicity. Newspapers from coast to coast ran breathless stories about the spectacle, the crowd, the science gone wrong. The name Katy was on every tongue, its logo stamped in the memory of 40,000 witnesses and millions more readers. In the end, the company's greatest expense was not the settlements or the cost of scrap iron, it was the risk of being forgotten. And on that score, the crash at Crush was a roaring success. The dead faded into footnotes, but the legend of the day two trains became a bomb lived on, proof that in the Gilded Age, profit always found a way to outrun the bodies left behind. Steel can't bargain with steam. At 200 pounds per square inch and 380 degrees, a locomotive is not a vehicle. It is a bomb, waiting for its shell to crack. That lesson still runs through every pressure vessel, refinery, and boiler room today. The laws of thermodynamics do not care about spectacle or profit. They only care about balance. When you break it, the blast never negotiates. Drop your thoughts in the comments below.